Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1011th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs at the Brooklyn Rail, and I have the extraordinary pleasure and privilege and honor of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Wawi Navarroza and CJ Salapare. I'll now introduce Wawi and CJ. Wawi Navarroza is a renowned Filipina lens-based artist known for her large format photographic tableaus and self-portraits. Informed by post-colonial dialogue and globalization, Navarroza employs her corporal form as an artistic medium. Her in-studio collages serve as a testament to the various facets and stages of the women's narrative, portraying woman as creator. She's the recipient of the Asian Cultural Council Fellowship Grant in New York and the Lucas Artists Fellowship Award for Visual Arts in San Francisco. Her work has been exhibited in museums and galleries internationally. And our host today, CJ Salapare, is a curatorial assistant at the Whitney Museum of American Art, where he's working on Edges of Ailey. His research spans the fields of Philippine diaspora, art historical method, and performance studies. He has contributed essays and interviews to Artist Space, Far Near, the Hammer Museum, the 2024 Venice Biennale, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. He received Masters of Philosophy degrees in art history and arts education from the University of Cambridge and his bachelor's degree in art history from Williams College. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to CJ to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Wawi. First of all, thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for arranging this. I'm delighted to be in conversation with Wawi. Thank you to Wawi for making the works that we will be speaking about at length today. And thanks to you all for coming on a Tuesday afternoon. So, Wawi, how are you? Where are you calling from? That's where I want to begin.
I'm great. I'm in Manila, in the other side of the world. It's 2 a.m. here. I was in New York last month to open the show, early in January. So, and this opportunity with Brooklyn Rail really is something that I was looking forward to. So thank you to the team, thank you Chloe, and thank you CJ. And I'm very excited for the conversation that we're going to have tonight.
Great. So I think just to provide an anchor for people, if we could start sharing the slides, Chloe. I think first, Wawi, it would be great to give a feel for everyone here about your show at Silver Lens, which is your first institutional show here in New York, and which encompasses a very recent series of works of yours from, let's say, like the early or like the mid-2010s up until the present moment. So we have a couple of slides that show installation views. And then I was thinking, yesterday we had met and Wawi had mentioned the Roman god Janus, looking forward and looking back. And it would be great if we could employ or kind of be inspired by that today, to not only think about the beautiful works that you've created that have such chromatic force and such presence of figure and of life, but to realize that they don't appear in a vacuum, that these are ideas and forms and strategies that you've been pondering, that you've been kind of playing around with, and that you've really been refining throughout the course of your artistic career. So we'll sort of be moving across different times and scales throughout your practice. And I think this will be a really good opportunity for people to get a sense of your range and your fullness of making. You work primarily with photography, but there are so many other formal artistic and aesthetic devices that you employ. And I'd love to get a sense, to get a chance to talk with you about that. So I guess my first question is, Wawi, how would you like to introduce or to kind of provide the point of entry for people for your show at Silver Lens?
So the show that is currently up in New York in Silver Lens is called The Other Shore. And it actually references this dual sides. Like when you say the other shore, you're already demarcating, a viewpoint of where you're looking at. So it's meant to, aside from referring to the Philippines, where I'm from, which is an archipelago of 7,000 plus islands, it's also the other shore as a metaphor for mirror and a metaphor for self-portraiture in itself. So my practice has always been marked with self-portraiture, which started 25 years ago and more with my studies. And it's something that I've only recently come back actually in 2016, because there was a time that I wasn't doing self-portraits. So there's this show in New York right now, bookends 2019 and 2023, when there were many shifts and changes happening in my personal life and as well as my life as an artist. So what I do is in my art practice, my lived experience is always transmuted and transfigured into embodying in self-portraits. And yeah, so what we're probably gonna focus on tonight is to kind of weave through this, because as you said, it mirrors among each other, the works talk to each other, and also with time, the things that I've made before and the things that I'll also possibly already hinting at. So there's not just the transnational as a person who has moved from place to place, but there's also an element in the work that is also moving in time. And there's the interest in art history seeps in through the work.
Great. So I think with that, if we could just move to the first comparative slide. Just thought I'd toss a couple of images. It's the art historian in me. You have to put things side by side and see what sticks. So Wawi, I brought together 3 works that span 10 years of your making that seem at first to be visually similar, but perhaps different in terms of intent, in terms of sight, et cetera, but I just think all of the things that you touch upon, so you touch upon gaze, place, genre, metaphor, material, what you're really speaking to encompasses a set of structures that end up governing not only the way that you make and the way that it's received, but also the way that you, the artist, are moving through it. And something that's really fascinating is how through your practice, you subvert or completely play around with these structures, that there is a set of rigorous philosophical operations at play that I think really shows in this most recent body, but that, is something you've demonstrated time and time again. So first, could you speak to the first 2 works on the left? Like how do you think we get from this grid or this kind of netting form to this play on the grid and the ways that you evoke it in terms of netting and the ways you evoke it in terms of its malleability or in terms of a potential figure, the ways that it becomes your actual vestment in terms of clothing, the way it becomes background, tablecloth, setting, etc. There's a multidimensionality here that I'd really love for you to speak about.
Yeah, so in my timeline with my artistic creation, it always moves with where I am and what I've been through, and but it's not a narrative kind of storytelling. It's more of a interpretation through the use of the material. And in the first one, The Gathered Throng in 2012, it came after a loss of after I finished my master's in Madrid. I lost all my files because I was robbed. So I questioned then, what is a photographer if there are no images? Because it literally was in a blink of an eye, I disappeared, and it felt so unreal. And I already had Manila waiting for my homecoming for a show. And then I also just received one of the most important prizes of the Philippines, Cultural Center of the Philippines 13 Artist Award. And so there were no photos to show of the years that I was spending in Spain. And then I built this huge installation in the gallery, and this is what I call the Gathered Throng. It provided, I thought it provided that structure, that kind of matrix in which to start from. And again, you know, like there was a loss that happened, and here is like a blank canvas, so to speak, but it's also very precarious in a way. It's soft, and then it's not formed as well, but it gave the space, you know, some magnitude, you know, out of the emptiness that you can form something. And I guess the interest for fabric and the way that fabric flows and the way it's soft, and also to give it form in a way, there's this wonderful collaboration of opposites in there, like the soft and the hard, the structured and the flowing. And in here we see again in 2016, I did it with the fabric called poleng, which is a fabric that it's a ceremonial fabric in Bali, but also which is a part of the everyday life in there. Yeah, and so now we were looking at Spain, Manila, Bali, and when I did a residency, I got sick with dengue and I was hospitalized, and I didn't know if it was the fever or because it's a really debilitating disease, the tropical disease. That was because I was researching plants and the mosquitoes. That's how I got sick. But then I also healed because of the plants that they also kept giving me. And there was this life cycle at the moment of like, you know, almost near death, because you don't know. I was in 2 weeks in the hospital, and after that I couldn't walk. And I think it's not included here, but I have a self-portrait with crutches in in the tableau. So going back to the grids, it always provided for me this map or something that I could lay over. And then in here on the last one, which is 2022, it's called the Shopper self-portrait with artichoke. I used the grids in a very repetitive manner, almost to underline itself again and again. And with it, I created negative space, forming a vessel in the back. And also with it, I highlighted the material culture that's very, you know, in the Philippines, we have this grid basahan, which is made out of upcycled fabric, unused fabric. And it's a doormat in the Philippines, and you can actually use it for anything, but mostly as a doormat. But then I put it behind her head like a halo. So in that gesture alone, I'm already, you know, activating the material in a different way. So yeah, so it's just also, yeah, I'm fascinated how you've woven this through, CJ, because in fact when you called it waft and weft, it feels like it's also true in the way that I'm creating. I always identified with the weaving process and the women who make the mats in the Philippines. Yeah, so more on that later, I guess, but that is something very fascinating. The grids and the overlaid map, not only for as a form, but also in geography. We have the latitudes and longitudes of places. So I'm really, I think it's such a powerful device to see in the tableaus.
Wow. Well, that was, you know, such a beautiful way of speaking to that through line. And I'm so curious because in all three of these instances, you really emphasize the sense of handling, that this material is not just something that exists in the abstract, that you yourself are kind of thinking through the netting, that you're handling this kind of material from Bali. You're the one who's setting or kind of staging that studio photograph on the right. And so I'm just wondering, like, could you speak more about your kind of process, the ways that, like, what goes through not just your mind, but let's say through your body, what happens kinesthetically as you're handling material, which seems to be, you know, like a ground for you. And also, I want to throw in a word here. There's a sense of resourcefulness that's really remarkable with all three of these. I mean, like the most stark example is this netting that you've conceived of in the face of a complete and utter lack, you know, like this sense of destruction. You've still managed to find creation. you know, in terms of all of your travels, you're kind of soaking, you know, you're imbibing or taking in all of these traditions or what you encounter, but you're also seeing it as a resource for your own making. Like what is happening there with this resourcefulness for you?
I guess that's a very important aspect of being a Filipino or being born and raised here, is that it comes naturally, the DIY-ness of things. We do it ourselves, you know, for lack of this or that, we manage to transform things, you know, either informally or, you know, like we just see the materials for what they are and then move from there. And in my case, if we're talking about the process, it's accumulative. So there's also time involved. And that's why it takes longer than usual. You know, if photography should be fast, right? But my process is very slow, because the materials have to be at hand. I don't know when I see this material what it'll be. So, and then other materials add up. When I go to another country for, you know, artists, we go on exhibitions abroad, on different places to do residencies and to do different things. And with every introduction to place, then I'd always go to the market and another, you know, it would add to the materials. Up until the time that I'm creating, I wouldn't know what it'll be. So it becomes also a process of collaging and also assembling. And in fact, in the process of it, there's this really laborious aspect of setting up the whole mise en scène. I'm the lights man, I am the camera man, I am the wardrobe, I am the set designer, I am the everything. And it wouldn't work if I had assistants with me, because I'm working, I'm building on the fly. I don't have any, I can't, you know, really just already tell what's gonna happen. So from the laborer side of me, which is physical, which at that time when I was making this this last the 2022 works, I was also sick and living in Istanbul. I was exhausted just putting the background, and I would lie down and I would set up the camera, lie down. So it added to the very slow process. And it's also, you know, being real with the body, because that time I had autoimmune disease with my thyroid, and it really, I think in one of the photos you'd see it, but it was a difficult time to be, you know, exerting all these force. So it added another layer to the process. Of course, people can't see that, but it made it more contemplative for me as I was making it. And then the last stage of the process, which is, or in the studio, the last stage of that would be having to summon everything that I can call forth. And this is where it gets a bit metaphysical and a bit, you know, a bit babaylan, you know, this babaylan is a pre-colonial priestess in the Philippines. It just, or the place that the artists would go is this kind of I don't know how to describe it, but it gets transmuted at the moment of it happening. And with my tired body, with all the lights and the camera and the mise en scène set up, and then at the moment of it, then it just, you know, I just embody it. So when people say if I'm doing all this performance or projection, quite the contrary, it's really going in. I don't project out to the camera. It's looking in and then kind of I don't know what's the word. So one curator described that my medium isn't really photography. It's actually myself, my body. So I guess that's the easiest way to describe the artist as the medium. And yeah. And that's how the self-portraits are born in the studio. And then after that, of course, it's digitally, there's some digital anomalies I introduce here and there to just remind the viewer that we're looking at a constructed image and that photography is malleable, and that, you know, it's plastic arts. It's evolving, and it's also up for questioning, right? So I medal on each stage, and finally the frames. So the artist frames are also extensions of the work, so that the viewer could have a physical experience of the object as a photograph framed on a wall. So every layer has the decisions, has intentions that I made for the work.
Wow. Well, I mean, like you really get a sense of how you're interrogating a different set of matrices or coordinates, ones that seem much more not just psychological, but elemental or primordial, like who are you? Who is the artist? How do I embody this? Is there a clean separation between inside and outside, self and other? It's in the very name of your title. I guess the question I have is, like, what then are some of the guiding questions that you've been asking through your work, throughout these years? Like, what are the things, let's say, for example, in the face of utter destruction of a kind of corpus or a body of work, what keeps you making? In the face of illness or mortality, when you're at a kind of the edge of that, what keeps you going? Like, what is this force that ends up serving as this motivation? And maybe it's not in the form of a question, maybe it's an idea, it's a horizon. I was just wondering if you could maybe touch upon that a bit before we move to the next slide.
I guess the because of all the many life experiences all throughout, and there's always the return, the coming back. When they're all throughout history, we have the story of the coming back of the hero, right? But we've never heard much about the coming back of the woman, when she's gone through childbirth, when she's gone through some, really tough times. But because a lot of that is internal, the wounds don't show up with cuts and, things. But with the self-portrait, it's, for a long time, I've shied away from it because when I was a much younger artist, I would question the position of self-portraits and how is it serving a bigger society. And now I've understood that the more that I do with self-portraits, the more that I actually help to fill in that gap in history, that women have always been there as creators. We've always did, not just in art, but in society, in our communities, in our homes, creating, whether or not someone's looking or someone's writing about you. But when you're doing a self-portrait, you take it upon yourself, that act of bravery. That's the bravest thing. I guess what I do for my art practice is to be both vulnerable and strong at the same time. And that alone is already such a potent invitation for the viewers to look upon how it is for themselves as well. And that's what they say when they look at the photos, that the way I see it is like the women see women through the stories of other women. And that's universally applicable all around, not just in one specific place. Yeah, so that part of filling in this gap that hasn't been talked about as much. So that's why I'm doing the self-portraits.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just your use of the word vulnerable but strong, you can't help but think about the tensile strength of fabric while hearing that. There's that echo.
Think of everyone has that mother, that aunt, that relative, that that that's why maybe we don't talk about it as much, because it comes as innate, but we need to be reminded of it. Yeah.
I guess thinking about the next slide, it's really interesting that you mentioned this kind of mythological narrative arc, because when you said that, I was like, oh, people often frame it in terms of Odysseus or Telemachus, but I've always been like, what's happening with Penelope? And so on and so forth, right? And so it's Oh, sorry.
She's at home.
No, exactly, exactly. You know, and I think that these two works kind of speak to your own interest in a kind of, I guess, mythologizing anew or reimagining what these stories are specifically about, you know, the stories of creation, the stories of place, and maybe what photography can bear witness to or kind of fabulate in some ways, fabulate productively, let's just say that. Like, could you speak more about these two works? You know, they're very disparate series. The one on the right is up at Silver Lens. The one on the left is not.
Yeah, so there was a time when I'm out of the studio when after my studio was destroyed by a fire. So then this marble series came after that, and it was stark white, almost like a clean slate. And to look at marble here as both tabula rasa and memento mori. Because of course, after the fire, then I was questioning again, what's destruction, what's creation, what's the, you know, these kinds of big questions. And then so I went out of the studio and I wasn't doing any self-portraits. I was looking at marble as the hard material that is of the earth, which is shaped by the agency of men. And in this case, the men who are doing it is also shaped by the stone, so that their body is also built by the labor that they extract to the stone. So there, that's kind of how you call it, like an ecosystem with nature and man and human. And this particular work, marble, is loaded as with the Western art history. We all know of marble as, you know, Greco-Roman, and it's in the most the grandest places with the columns and all these kind of ideas of the hero and like you said, the mythological origins of things. But in this series, it's the whole title for this series was Medusa, the island, the island and the tropical marble, because you wouldn't think of marble in the tropics. So that was a way of me subverting and reintroducing that there's also another side of the world, not just Carrara marble, Italy, you know, all this is, of course, that's what we studied in school. And yeah, so that was the attempt. And in here on the other side, wherein I now this is after a few years, and I finally had another studio, so I went back to making tableaus, and this one was an appropriation of a painting by our national artist Federico Alcuaz, and instead of it in the original painting, it was him in the back painting the nude. And so my question was, what if it's a woman and it's me, fully aware, doing that? And in here, there's that, again, the duality of being looking out and then looking in. Who is dreaming with eyes closed and who is dreaming and creating with eyes awake? So these things. Yeah.
Wow.
Did I answer your question? Sorry.
No, you did. I mean, there's just so much to unpack here. I don't even know where to begin. I think, well, the first question is the first question I have is in terms of the painting on the, or the photograph on the right, apologies. You have these, what is this relationship between the canvas and the photographic surface and also the implements, right? Like you don't really see, you know, like paintbrushes, the easel, etc. But you're very staunchly holding the camera, you know, and you're set against, but you're still spilling out over the edges of that frame behind you.
It's like a, yeah, I got it. You got the tableaus I make have little codes in them. So the frame within the frame is something of a footnote there, and then you saw it. So this relationship between photography and painting is also fraught because a lot of I mean, in that in between space when people can't, or the viewers always at least refer to my works as paintings, or in photography, it's difficult to say what I do in photography, right? They ask you, so what's your subject? And of course, I'm drawing from real materials, and I have to capture it with a tool instead of painting, which is more of a immediate relation to the canvas. So yeah, there's always that wannabe painter in me since university, that I said, okay, now I have to find a way to make them both, seamless, and like it doesn't matter anymore. Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting. Even the way that the fabric is draped in the back, it has such an echo to like Sam Gilliam tapestries, him taking that off the wall. And like you can't really see in the close-up of this image, but like that sliver of book, that cover that you can see is being in nothingness, so it's like I don't know, I'm just so curious about all of these codes that you leave. Like
Yeah.
even
And
the
I was
holding the
Mhm.
ribbon. Like it makes me think of a surrealist. You know how they'll hold the spoon to make sure that they're like awake, or like before they go to bed, like the spoon drops, and that's how they know they've entered the state of unconsciousness.
Yeah, I like the little hints of the uncanny, but because it's in photography, it's harder to do it. But I insert it here and there when the objects turn into. I like objects for what they are, but I like it when they're also um it becomes very symbolic once it's placed within the tableau. And
Mhm.
it's for the viewer to catch little bits and pieces of it depending on the attention they give to it. So
Mhm.
it gets more complicated with the other ones because I still keep on adding.
Exactly, exactly. And maybe this will be a good place to go to the next slide and begin talking about all of these details, the profusion of detail that I think gives us such an immediate impact, especially in this show at Silverlands. Almost to the point of like, oh my gosh, there's so much color, there's so much life, there are so many forms. How do I sit with this? How do I move through this? But with this, I really want to think about the vessel as an idea, as a form in its multiple senses. Here's a series that you did in 2013 with Urban Terrarium, and then also this kind of incredible glitch on the vase. I guess if you could lay it out, what's happening with the vessel, Wawi?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm looking at it side by side, 10 years in between. I guess it's recurring for a reason. This terrarium series was done when I came back to Manila from Spain. Remember that story of not having anything to show? So when I finally got back, then I started thinking of how do I reroute back to myself in Manila. And for a long time, I didn't know what it was, but the plants kind of became such a instrumental, kind of like a very disempowering one, but you want to talk about bigger things and they're small. So it's the idea of landscape, but small. And the way that it was done was that I collated all of the plants that the volunteers would give, depends on where they are. So some would find it in the cracks of the concrete along the way to their commute. Some, in a in a landfill, some in a golf place, and then some in beside the church, the hospital. So it became like like a map of Manila in a way that it was being signifiers of these different places. So what I did when they got in the studio was I arranged them inside the terrarium, almost questioning what is the relation between two possible things that would not exist in reality, and I put them in the same terrarium, would they coexist, and would they survive, that ecology, that kind of in that habitat. So I made those to have like micro histories of Manila in little vessels, but it also, when you zoom out, it's actually about when we were colonized by Spain, they would send out the tropical plants from the Philippines to Madrid. And that's how they built, and that's the reason why they built Palacio de Cristal, which is now an annex to the Reina Sofia Museum. But it was purposely built to show tropical plants. And this is how the plants traveled from Manila to Madrid, from Manila to Europe, in small Wardian cases, which is terrarium, so that they wouldn't be eaten by rats during the long journey at sea. So, and they preserve that kind of humid environment inside. So with these small things, we can talk about post-colonial discourse. We could talk about migration. We could talk about ecology. We could talk about urbanity. So in that sense, that nothing is natural, but yeah. So this was like the first landing in Manila, and I had to contain them in small vessels. And then here on the 2022 work called Todo Lo Que Tengo, bottomless or bereket. And I do play with the titles as signifiers again. So there's Spanish and there's Turkish. This one is very much informed by me being in Istanbul, in old Constantinople or Byzantium, and Anatolia at large. Because when I was there, I was exposed. I was literally at the door of ancient civilization. And then all these findings and artifacts, and archaeology being done there, it's always vases, containers, vessels. And that very material spoke about the first matriarchal cultures came from Anatolia, and which is adjacent to, of course, part of Mesopotamia, which is the Fertile Crescent. So that kind of zoomed out to now, how is that relevant to us? So that's why I've layered it and literally showed the cuts, how a clay vessel would be our present day plastic mineral water bottles. So that kind of careening back and forth with time, but still some things remain the same. The vessel, we are vessels, we are a source. We're talking about women. And this was done when I was also thinking about my son. Well, he was born during the pandemic. So that's another layer of complexity, was that the artist as a mother came in, the artist as a creator of life, the artist beyond that, it's that's another theme that I introduced with a current show in New York.
And I mean, I'm just so like, in terms of the series, I think later on in some of the other slides, there are so many ways that you think about, like motherhood or womanhood. You think about this kind of diasporic sweep. I guess I'm just so interested in, like with the terraria, like you are quite literally having people pick something from the ground up. Like that is as elemental as you can get from a place, right? And then it ends up becoming a metaphoric microcosm or an ecosystem, as you say. Like what, and I see a similar operation happening in so many of your photographs, like some people, like the formal term might be collage, but you use the term gathering so much. And like, what does it mean to gather all of these influences, all of these traditions, et cetera, into the same surface or space that you kind of warp or distort or kind of bring to the fore or saturate in different ways? Like it's your own way of remixing this very ground. And just like, it's so interesting seeing how I guess how you've been doing that, or how like these different sources have kind of led to this way of thinking. I don't know. I
Yeah,
guess
I get sometimes it gets too much to be honest, because how do I make sense of it, right? And that's where the magic happens when it sinks, right? Or because what do I do with all this information? What do I do with all these impressions? And that whole hybridity that's happened in through the history of the Philippines and through my own moving around, how do I figure it? How do I make sense out of it? So I've come to accept, because before there was this tug of war between identity, which is me and which is not me, right? This is always having this debate, but now I've come to accept it's quite okay. So right, I'm contaminated. It's never gonna stop. We're all porous. We're all plural in our identities, and the way I approach it is when the syncretism happens is
yeah.
I think magical, and in that um in that way a third can be born out of it. So what I do with all these collages, for lack of a better word, or the gathering, is that I flatten them so that it's sort of there's cohesion there, there's adhesion when you flatten things, right? And I actually purposely did it because it's harkening back to a lot of Oriental traditions in art. When there's always this the flatness and the flatness of the image plane. If you look from Istanbul, which is Byzantine, with the icons, and then you move through the Middle East to Persia and India, you'd have the miniatures, and you move to China and then Japan with the ukiyo-e and the flattened screens. And then in the Philippines, we have the mats, which is the first artists in the Philippines were weavers. So
Mhm.
there's this flatness and the distortion that comes with it's secondary, but the colors are primary. The colors, we have this birthright and heritage of the polychrome. So the polychrome has been kind of when I was studying, it felt like to be polychromatic would be to how you say, a bit provincial. Well, that was at least when I was a younger artist. It was like, okay, the colors, um, because it might not be that critical, or it could be a bit unsophisticated and all of that. And it's all of these things that we were trying to run away from as, like children of the post-colony. And then as I have discovered where the art takes me is that I could actually use these same things and be be more aware that I'm learning as I go, and that I'm showing what it was before we were made ashamed of. So the colors, so I put it back. I didn't like this mishmash all around, the crazy horror bakwi, really jam-packed in all this no space. And then I put it in my work. So this is a process for me to also unlearn the things that I've been kind of stuck before. So yeah, it's quite refreshing, and for people to actually see that, oh, this work has a place in the scheme of things in contemporary art, and not just in the Philippines but also now in New York.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, just hearing you talk about like that sweep of different perspectival, orientations, like it's so remarkable how you collapse or kind of, as you put it, syncretize all of these different ways of seeing, like, into your kind of photographs that don't involve like a Western perspective. So I'm thinking about these Mughal miniatures, the axonometric grid, this kind of clustering that happens that is like teeming with life. I'm thinking about weaving, the certain patterns that you're thinking about. All of that is somehow finding a way here. Like you're seeing all of that and sort of not projecting it out, but embodying that, you know, as both the subject and the maker in your photographs. It's so fascinating. And I think before going to the next slide, I just want to ask one question. Like what, in terms of nature here, and how do you differentiate? It seems like you're using a mix of both kind of natural flora and also artificial artificial flowers, etc. Could you speak more to the intentions behind that? Like what does it mean, or what does it feel like to have both of those coexisting, you know, this kind of incommensurability?
Because that's a simple reason is that that's the contemporary world that we all find ourselves in now. There's this disconnect, and there's also an abundance of innovations in material, and also the convenience for humans. So just by merely showing a plastic container there, it also speaks about the global trade in a way, the global moving of things. And even the fabrics are not just artisanal. There are fabrics that are from commercially available fabrics that have been imported here and there. And there's also that the provenance of things, like just how the terrarium happened to be there. The fabrics also come from different places. And so in my work, there's this dialogue also of the high, low, commercial, artisanal, the yeah, exactly as you said, that I don't shy away from that, I don't mean to just show the ideal, but I wanted to show the current times where we're living. And this is something that is profuse in the markets in Southeast Asia. And I think that's how my work also ties into the work that I'm seeing now from contemporary photography from Africa and from Latin America and from South Asia, because we all have that material. For some reason, we have that mint colored monoblock chair. And yeah, so that's really fascinating.
And you know, it's like, it's so, I think maybe if it's all right, Wawi, if we could skip to the slide with the Balikbayan box. Here we'll let people just soak that in, but it's so important to think about that kind of hemispheric sweep, or what we might call as a kind of diaspora, right? Diasporic aesthetic, diasporic form, diasporic content, etc. But to think about it or to really enliven the ways that it exists, you know, where diaspora is form, it's content, it's life, it's subject, it's object, etc. Right? We sort of find it everywhere. It's sort of the glue, right? Or it's, as you know, you use the word movement. It is quite literally movement incarnate. And so I want you to speak, is it all right if you speak to all of the different kind of places or geographies, both kind of actual, but also, you know, like emotional or mental, that comprise your own kind of diasporic understanding? I think both of these works embody that, both in terms of a kind of personal understanding, but also in terms of these other people or communities and other women that you're hearkening to.
I really identify with the overseas foreign workers experience as an artist, because artists are my colleagues, and we there's a common experience of being given all these places to go to, and that's a trajectory. If you know, from an emerging artist, and then you're given a grant and a residency abroad, and then you do an exhibition there, and then you come back, and in some sort of way you'd have to you kind of go there as that, in the same journey of the migrant. And that word resilience is something that I don't want to repeat here, but there's something in the Filipino identity that just seems to know how to shape shift depending on where they are. And the Balikbayan box is it's almost like an archaeological adventure of what they found from where they went to, and they send it to back home, back to the Philippines. And this is what you see in this in the work Mouth of Pearls, Oriental and Overseas. So it's also care about the care. You're always thinking of who you left behind and the circumstances that led you there. And then on the other side, the La Bruja, all the places she's gone. Here, I proudly place her in an interior setting, very domestic, with cleaning implements and all of the, seems to be like a living room setup, but in an odalisque position, which is a trope in Western art. Here, there's an open-ended view of it. A lot of people ask, is she depicting the Filipina domestic worker? Because that's always the first entry when you meet a Filipina abroad, or there's always that the first encounter of a Filipino would be, oh, I know someone, or I know, she's working for, at home. And in here, it's not a static definition, but here I present this figure who's lounging. Is she at rest? Is she just did she work, or is she from the house, or is she odalisque of the West, or is she reclining Buddha from the East? So there's that mirror upon mirrors happening here. And
Exactly.
it keeps adding, and all the fabrics come from different places.
It's like that sense of proliferation isn't just in terms of material, it's in terms of different perspectives. You know, like you bring up the idea of mirror, it's like there's a multiplicity of self that's happening here, and that seems to be really important to your way of making and thinking, especially around women, you know, like there's not one way of kind of approaching it. I guess I'm really curious to think about, or to hear from you, like what the reception of your works has been like in these different places, you know, since, as you put it, you kind of encode a lot of things or leave little clues that maybe someone can pick up and someone can't, right? There are degrees of legibility to these photographs. What has it been like having these works in New York versus, let's say, Manila, for example, et cetera, et cetera?
So in Manila, it's a given. If they see a basahan, they know what it is. But in New York, and I've met Filipinos who are in diaspora, and it felt such a homecoming for them to see these objects that they probably, you know, in their childhood, or their parents talk about it. So even the broom would become such a powerful, you know, powerful object to remind them. And if they take it, the objects take them to emotional places, their memory, and the desire to know more. And to me, I feel really humbled that it's able to translate that in different places. So whether or not it's shown in Spain, then it becomes informative to people who haven't been there. So they know that we have this inherent material culture. And to the Spanish who's seen some of the vessels, they would know there's a botijo, which is very indicative of Spain. And the ones who are from Turkey, they would see lots of different objects that were taken in Turkey. So I've actually, it's my curiosity also of how it's going to be received in different places. And the power of photography is that also we could reproduce this and exist at the same time all at once, like bilocating, reproducing everywhere. And there was a time that this was in China, and then it's in New York, and then in Australia. And the way that it's kind of just, how you say, the apparitions have different purposes for everyone who's seen it. It's quite satisfying, and I felt that, you know, the job's done in that way. And I'm also harnessing photography for what it is. I'm not shying away from photography's nature to be reproducible. And because, of course, it's also important that they see the actual pieces. in person, because they'd have like a physical reaction to the object on the wall. Yeah.
Mhm. I think just with that, with the last slide, you talk about the physical presence of the objects, but the subjects in all of them, like the elephant in the room, it's you, Awi, like how, and womanhood, motherhood, these ideas of femininity, being able to assert it, being able to kind of multiply it in all of these beautiful selves, in ways that are rigorous and critical and sensitive. That's just, like the center around which all of these wayward lines of thinking operate. And so I guess I want to end this conversation with that, like how this is, to the left is the first work that people are greeted with in the exhibition at Silverlands. And the work on the right is a diptych quite literally depicting you before motherhood and you mother and son. Like, could you speak more about these?
Yeah. Yeah. So the red piece, which is the title is "The Fire Remained of Ignis Mirabilis," self-portrait after the fire. I meant to put it in front of the street for anyone who's passing by to basically just ask, who's this woman? What's she doing here? Where is she from? The first things that you ask. And in a pun, I kind of played it in my head as she's the woman at the threshold. She's literally at the door. So who is this woman at the threshold? What is the threshold? Is that it's a threshold of transformations that she had to go through. And women are made to move with cycles and seasons and transformations, and there's always regeneration and rebirth throughout it. And so here we encounter this figure looking straight ahead. And to me, this is the first portrait I did when I had a studio again after the fire, which was I was without a studio for 2 years. Then I had a little cigarette with a little fire in it. So to cure the disease with its own thing, how you say it, like if the studio was destroyed by fire, then I should not be afraid of it, but instead learn to use it. And in that way, that was just, encapsulated there. And for many years, I was thinking, I've seen this image before. So here's when this kind of brujeria happens, is because I made this intuitively, and I really nowadays do my work intuitively, whereas before I would think a lot. But yeah, so this is intuitive. And a few years after that, I realized that this image actually talked to another image that I've probably seen while living in Spain, and it was La Duquesa de Alba of Goya. And last month I was in New York. I was so happy to find out that the original is actually in the Hispanic Society Museum. And I visited it, and it all came back together like full circle. So with that, it's also zooming into like my this relationship with Spain and the Latinness of the work, Mexico, and all of that. So I just like how it's expanding beyond the time it was made. And then finally, the portals is about that divide that is actually an illusion divide, because it's not a before and after. It's existing at the same time, but it's just informing each other. So the mother gets informed by the artist, and the artist gets informed by the mother, these are forms of the creator. She's both creator as artist, creator as mother. And it's not like a straight line. And in fact, in contemporary art, this is something that is being talked about more, whereas before it's the reason why the works from women artists kind of trickled down after having families or having kids and all that. and sexy topics like this has to be talked about. So this is my my thoughts at that time, and I've used the fabrics from the places that I find myself in that time. So there's the Philippines, the blanket, which is everybody knows from the Philippines. They would know this fabric, and then the Iznik pattern from Turkey. Yeah, so portals are porous, and each of them, of the works that I've made, I would think of them as doors. People could enter them with different keys. They could enter through color, they could enter through different layers and different dimensions of the work. It's multi-layered and it's heavy and it's dense, but it's also very playful in a way. And if I may end with the Rosas Pandan, if we can show the central figure. We have that, the slide. Yes, the blue one, yes. The Rosas Pandan, where she's sitting on the ball.
I think it might be number 20.
Yes, that number. So this is the most recent 2023 work that I did, and it's called Rosas Pandan. It's from a folk song from the province where my parents are from, which I know that my mother knows this, but I didn't bother with folk songs or anything folk because again, that whole it's just corny, or you know, where how does that belong to our life in the city or this modern times and all of that. So when I was making Rosas Pandan, I reread the lyrics, and the lyrics is in Cebuano dialect, which is not Filipino in the city. It's a particular part of the Philippines. And it's good that I know it, growing up with my parents who spoke it at home. So basically, the folk song goes, it's in a march beat, and then it goes like, here's Rosas Pandan from the far-flung mountain village, and she's going to town for the town fiesta to dance her, to sing her ancient song and dance the forgot the name of the dance, but it's a specific dance. And all the people of the town fall in love with her, and the boys and the men drool. That was the song. Well, I thought it was, you know, a tongue in cheek and it's all that. But the fascination came after realizing that this song is actually now sung all over the world, in the chorales of the world. So if you see from Kuala Lumpur to Seoul to Utah to New Zealand to where's that? Czech Republic, and all of the countries are singing this song in native dialect in Visayan, in the chorales. And to me, that was mind-boggling. And I see her, this Rosas Pandan woman, this provinciana, this who has traveled the world now. So to me, she's the transnational. And all of these places that she's been, from Moscow to all of this, I would imagine her finally arriving to herself and finally arriving to her self-determination. And this is what this tableau is about. That kind of volviendo, you know, coming, return. And here she is in front of you. Yeah, so that is the story behind this tableau. And the materials, of course, were made to talk about the plastic upcycling, and which created a garden around her, and then the patajong, which is a heritage fabric that's also made in the Philippines. Yeah.
I mean, what a beautiful way to end things, Wawi. My God. I mean, all I can say is thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Thank you for making me share. And yeah.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Wawi. And thank you, CJ, for your insights and for just that incredible dialogue. That was so generous and lovely. I have several questions from the audience, if you'll have them, Wawi. The first one's going to be from Carol. Carol, I'll give you the chance to unmute to ask your question directly.
Okay. Thank you both. That was so rich and textured, and I loved hearing you unpack the work together. I wanted to first say specifically to Wawi how grand it was to see you insert yourself into a masculine discourse as a woman and as a diasporic Filipina, to really bring your experiences of place into the work was quite enlivening. Thank you for that. But I actually had a question about portraiture, and specifically about self-portraiture. I'm wondering if you see yourself as part of a tradition of self-portraiture. I was constantly going back and forth in my mind between your work, what I was seeing on the screen, and people like Yazumaza Morimura or Renee Cox, and certainly there are many, many others one could bring into it, or even, you know, an older history or histories of self-portraiture. And in tandem with that, just quickly, you mentioned Alquaz, and I'm kind of wondering also, who inspired you, or who inspires you with the work you've been doing? There's so much in there that, and you talked a lot about textiles and things that are distinctly Filipino, or things that are distinctly Turkish, and I loved hearing all about that, but I just wondered if there were other artists' work that you might want to acknowledge or tell us about.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a great question. And I always believe that I'm here doing this thanks to the women artists who have done this before me. And I'm still in awe, and I'm always first, I'm a big art lover, and when I discover their works, it adds another it's another voice, and altogether it's almost we're trying to tell same things in different ways. Locally, I've always been fascinated with the work of Agnes Arellano, and she does a lot of the mythic imagination. And then Pasita Abad, the colors, and I'm proud that she's going to the Biennale. And Nena Sagil, and I hope I'm not forgetting artists that I really respect. Of course, there's also Frida. Frida Kahlo was like a best friend to me earlier on when I was starting. Nowadays, I rediscovered through many visits in the museums the works of Remedios Varo and the works of Leonora Carrington. And for sure, that Mexican, Spanish, Filipino thread, and all this kind of mishmash of a bit, you know, the mythical and the mystical, magical, and I like that. I like that visual culture of these women who have made this possible to tell stories of the interior through their art. And there's also Sonia Delaunay, Delaunay, who has worked with textiles, and I love her. I love her journey as well. And all of these women, or most of these women, also have traveled as transnationals and have gone to different places inside and outside of themselves, and with relationships also, not just to the relationships to their family, to their societies, and to themselves. So a lot of this. Yes, and finally, yep, I acknowledge that I belong to a tradition of artists who do self-portraits. And I would like to think that as long as I do this, then there's space for owning self-agency and self-representation with the body that I was born with and all the cultural cargo that comes with that. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Oh, yes, it did. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Carol, that was a wonderful question. Thank you so much. The next question is going to be from GE. GE, I'll give you the chance to ask.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, CJ, and thank you, Wawi. And thank you so much for this introduction to your work. I did not know about it before today. So this is what the Brooklyn Rail does. Thank you. How this kind of maybe connects with what we were just talking about a little bit. How did you first come to this special mix of using the tableau format to express a bit of story without being too diaristic about it? I mean, that balance in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because they almost think that to use art as expression is a license to just always be confessional. And there are some artists who are good with that, but I don't feel comfortable in that way. In fact, I'm very private, but with the work that I'm doing, I'm always transfiguring what the lived experience is always transmuted. It's never taken as literal, as if it was a narrative, but it's always transposed or remixed or something like that. I guess the tableau format came from my early interest in lyrical photography with what's this early photography, what's this called, the one in the pictorial works of early photography. There's studio and there's just the camera and the subject. And I would create what I call visual poems before. I did a lot of black and whites and darkroom experimentation. This actually also comes from, I really enjoy solitude and reading books, and I write. So it came natural to speak in terms of symbol. And yeah, so the tableau is very natural to me.
Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, GE. Thank you for that question. Thank you, Wawi, for that answer. The next question is going to be from Eleanor on the Rail team. Eleanor, I'll give you the chance to ask your question.
Thank you, Chloe, and thanks so much, CJ and Wawi. This has been amazing. Wawi, the colors in your work are so vibrant and exciting, and I'm wondering if you could talk more about the choices behind them and if they symbolize anything or what they mean to you.
I go through periods of liking specific colors, and for some reason, it kind of a few months after or a year after, I would realize that it was also writing the time. But then I'm excited by how colors, when placed side by side with each other, reacts. I guess it sets the emotional temperature for the work, and it gives you that vibe. The vibrance is, to me, the life force of the works. Like it gives you that sensorial pleasure just looking at it. You don't have to, unpack all the meanings, but the colors, it's something that if my mother looked at, she would find it beautiful because it's colorful and it's full of joy. The word that I kept on hearing with the people who've been there and see the show, that there's this joy that's coming from the works, and it's because of the color. And the celebratory aspect of it is also highlighted, especially coming from 2020. We all had that. So the cakes were there to celebrate what came after, and that we should like really enjoy life. We should celebrate. We should find the color in things after all that. yeah, so the vibrance is through the colors, and the colors also reclaiming what we're the birthright of our culture for polychrome.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
Thanks for that question, Eleanor. Wawi, the last question is going to be from me today. I am really curious to hear you talk about curtains and sort of the way you use them as a framing device across your work, because when I was looking at your photographs, I just was in awe of the way the curtains act as both a framing device as well as a sort of destabilizing device. And they offer such room for play. I especially love the way you use the curtain in portals, where the curtain itself is sort of a mirror or a mode for examining two sides of oneself. It made me think about being a kid and the way we use curtains to reveal or to think about ourselves or to play at a story as a child, but it also made me think about the domestic, about the spaces where we feel comfortable. And I was just, and they're also just beautiful curtains that are visually so rich and textured and add so much to the composition. So I was curious to hear you talk about the curtains.
Thank you for bringing that up. It's actually an elephant in the room, right? Like the curtains. I'm a fan of curtains, but to think about curtains in photography, we have that in the device. We even have the first curtain, second curtain of the camera or the flashes. As a device that I've always used again and again, there's this part of photography, and there's also the part of me playing a game with the viewer, in fact, of what is concealed and what is revealed, what is interior, what is outside, and also to make forms. How can something soft make something rigid? And in this way, it's again being transformed. The material is also transformed. And I like also the curtain takes me back right away to home, to the memory of my mother doing in the interiors of the house. And these things that we also again shunned before, like we were like, oh, this is like mommy interior design. But to me, it speaks of tenderness, it speaks of care, and it speaks of that universal compulsion to make homes, to decorate it. And to decorate, it's not, it just doesn't sit well before as, high art, but now I'm putting them in front. Let's put women's work, let's put embroidery, basketry, weaving, curtains, all of these women things, and then put it in the conversation with contemporary art. And that's, I think, being brave and radical also.
I love it. Thank you so much for that answer. Thank you everyone for your questions today, and a huge thank you again to CJ and to Wawi for today's conversation, which has been just such a joy to listen to. Thank you as well, of course, to Kate and to Katie at the Silver Lens team, and to Silver Lens Gallery, who are always so supportive in preparing for these events. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor this program and make weekday conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, which you'll be able to view this conversation on very shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're available tomorrow, I'll be interviewing the curator Jordan Stein about the book Miyoko Ito, Heart of Hearts. And I hope you'll join us at 1 p.m. for that conversation. And now, without further ado, it's a Rail tradition to open up the microphones and give everyone the chance to say hello and goodbye as they leave. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Should we take a photo?
Yes, let's take a
you. Thank you so
Great
much.
conversation
today.
Thank you.
Thanks, CJ.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks, Wawi.
Thank
The
you.
show.
Thank you.
Go
It's
see the show,
happening next week.
everyone.
Is it next week or this weekend? Yeah, March 2.
Yeah, go see the show.
Saturday.
Such a stunner. It's so lovely. I hope
Thank
you
you
all
so
get a
much.
chance to go see it.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so,
much.
so much, everybody. Bye,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye.
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 Thank you.